Start today. We have a lovely new audiovisual system here, but it looks like we've got everything going, so that's awesome. So my name is Maura Bright. I'm a member of the Board of Trustees here at EHST. The Ethical Humanist Society of the Triangle promotes the use of reason and science in the search for and commitment to living an ethical life that benefits all humanity. We believe that personal inquiry, responsibility, and accountability are the best bases for ethical decision-making. Our weekly forums seek to broaden our understanding of ethics and human nature, and our congregational community encourages us to share diverse opinions, friendships, and camaraderie. We welcome everyone to share in our journey, especially including the visitors we have today, so thank you. If you want more information about our community, we are happy to give it. We'll be happy to press a little pamphlet on you or answer any questions you might have. Also, there's a visitor's sign-in sheet, which I believe our visitors have come by already. And if you would like a mask, we do have some available if you need a mask, if you want to social distance. Otherwise, I think everything's good. We tend to all have lots of shots here. So we are a community, and we take time to share our joys and concerns, not only in our direct community, but also in the larger community. And I have drafted Amy into the mic runner. But before she starts, I will say I have a joy, which is that my father-in-law is home from the hospital because he went into the hospital for several days, and at 90, that's always scary. And I have a second joy in that next Sunday, the group that I sing with, the Cardinal Singers of Raleigh, is going to do our spring concert. And in fact, yesterday I went to the 90th birthday party of one of our members. So that was really cool. In their group, I'm like the youngest, so it's a little different. The concert is in Raleigh. Unfortunately, it's at 3 o'clock in Raleigh at the Highland United Methodist Church on Ridge Road in Lake Boone. It will also actually be live streamed from their website. It's going to be fun. These women really know what they're doing. It's awesome. We got joys, concerns, comments, Gordon, and then Dorothy also.
Thank you. All right. This is a joy that occurred to me in the darkness between last Wednesday and Thursday. It is an observation of the joyous communication virtue of human speech. It is about an intentional effort known as speaking, the mechanics of which are quite more complicated than generally credited. It happens quite easily without any needed preparation or technique analysis. It requires a carefully controlled, slow and even breath exhalation that occurs simultaneously with chosen moderation in the push of vocal cord vibration. The specific sound of words is controlled by the spatial arrangement and shape of the mouth, especially the tongue. Those who hear someone speaking may find it of great value in its way of transmitting brain content, thoughts, songs, ideas, and information which had been confined to previously unpublished brain fodder in a quiet form known only to its originator.
Thank you, Gordon. That was very cool.
And next week you'll talk about hearing that allows us to understand what you just said. I have sort of two sides of a coin, a positive and a negative. So on the positive side, my dear cousin, who is my age, and I really consider her one of my best friends, has been doing a lot of traveling to national parks, but her husband has grown weary of this after about 25 parks. And one of the ones she has not been to, I'm labeling as probably the worst one, although I don't know that for a fact. And that's down in South Carolina. There's an old growth forest and swampy area that's a state park. How many have heard of it? It's called, I have to do a memory aid here. Congaree. Okay. So we're going to Congaree. Tuesday through Friday. And actually, I think it'll be great. She's already booked a canoe tour, so I don't mean to be so negative. It's just, it's not Yosemite or Yellowstone. Yeah. Even this early. Okay. Okay, thank you for that.
Mosquito heaven.
Yeah, and she did this, particularly out of consideration because my partner Steve has not been able to travel in a while because of his situation. And so the negative side of the coin is he was here yesterday for about 24 hours and his mother fell and cracked her collarbone. And for those of you who might not have heard, his father passed in March. So it's going to be a long haul for him. So
Atish, Solomon, and Chris.
Well, either next year or the following year, the World Cup cricket is coming to the United States. And who would have thought? We all thought that US and cricket were mutually exclusive, but nevertheless, it is coming to the United States, and US will have a team playing in the World Cup. Entirely made up of non-natives.
Are you sure anybody in the US knows how to play cricket?
I have a joy and a couple of concerns. First of all, I'll be going to visit my daughter in Asheville this coming weekend, which I always love doing to celebrate my 69th birthday, which
Woohoo!
happens next Sunday. So I won't be in this town. A couple of concerns. One associated with that is I've got to worry about whether or not my car is going to make it. But so it goes. And also on Thursday, I'm going to be going to see an oral surgeon to investigate a little cyst in my gums. So I'm a little concerned about that. That's funny.
Not to me.
I think Asheville sounds better, really. Chris had his hand up too.
I just finished a really good book called Frozen River by Ariel Lawhon. And it's about a woman in the late 1700s who really existed. She was a midwife. She kept a diary, and that's one of the reasons why this book has been written. But there was also a Pulitzer Prize winning book about her life based on her writings and her what she did. But she was a midwife, had a very interesting life. And the author at the end tells you what parts of it are fiction, which parts are real. But it's a really good book. I recommend it to anyone who wants to read about midwifery at that time. And it's also a murder mystery, so that's woven in as well.
That sounds really good. After Todd, I think we'll pass on to Fred.
We have a joy from Vera on the Zoom call here. She says, I am joyful about the solar eclipse tomorrow, even if it will be only a partial eclipse. I have seen a total eclipse in 1999 in Hungary with my mother and two nieces, and it is a wonderful experience I'll never forget.
Vera, that is really cool.
I have a great joy today. My great joy is I got my slides to work. So thank you.
Any
Okay.
further joys, concerns?
Well, I have a little joy, and that is that we have a group that will be cooking and serving at the IFC kitchen tomorrow. Yay. This is since February of 2020 that we haven't done it. So we're glad to be back.
And Amy, you can hang on to that mic because actually you're going to get to do opening words next. So we have Amy giving us opening words, and I'll blather while she walks up here.
And I have another joy, and that is April is Poetry Month. It did, yay. We don't have a program this year, but next year in April, we should do definitely do a poetry program. So I usually do poetry when I have opening and closing words. And so I was able to find some really good ones. This one is about spring and North Carolina, and it is by Billy Collins. It's called Field Guide. No one, I ask, knows the name of the flower we pulled the car to the side of the road to pick, and that I point to dangling purple from my lapel. I am passing through the needle of spring in North Carolina, as ignorant of the flowers of the South as the woman at the barbecue stand who laughs, and the man who gives me a look as he pumps the gas. And everyone else I ask on the way to the airport to return to where this purple madness is not seen, blazing against the sober pines and rioting along the roadside. On the plane, the stewardess is afraid she cannot answer my question, now insistent with the fear that I will leave the province of this flower without its sound in my ear. Then, as if he were giving me the time of day, a passenger looks up from his magazine and says, "Wisteria."
I feel pretty good. That was my guess of the flower. So our talk today is by our illustrious president, Fred Bright, who, in addition to being a microbiologist who works with food fermentations and all kinds of interesting computer models connected with it, also plays double bass in a couple of different bands. In fact, I believe he's playing this evening. And today will be giving us a talk about the development of fetal consciousness and the ethics of abortion. Please welcome Fred.
Yeah, it will. Good. There we go. Ah. All right, thank you. After a struggle to get a Chromebook to functionally display my slides, I'm very happy to be able to present today on this topic. One of our members, Solomon Gibson, sitting in the back, actually, has written a what we call an editorial, I guess, about the topic of abortion, and it's currently on our website. And that inspired this talk. I wanted to know more about what, and present more about what's really going on as a fertilized egg develops into a human. And is there a time when that fertilized egg becomes a person, or is that sort of some kind of nebulous thing we just have to guess at? And so what does the science say? That's what I wanted to know. And so that's what I'm going to talk about today. And so I'm going to start with a spoiler. This is basically the conclusions kind of my talk, but I'm going to start with a premise that without a functioning brain, life is less important, right? I mean, we don't have a lot of problems killing plants. You can get herbicide at Home Depot and spray it on the weeds in your yard, and you don't feel bad that you're killing a living thing. And breathing too, plants respire just like humans do. Air goes in and out. So can you say this is a criteria for life, a criterion for life? Sorry, I have to check that. And if you don't have a brain, if you're totally brain dead, are you dead? I mean, the body cells can be alive, but is that much different than a plant, right? What's going on there? So the brain, we understand from neurophysiology and from modern science, is the seat of consciousness. It is really where we reside. And so I'm going to go through some slides, talk about the evolution of the brain, talk about, some neurological theories of how consciousness develops. We're going to go then through, once we have a firm grasp of that, embryonic development, and then some ethical considerations for when is it really important to worry about whether an organism is alive, and should we really care about the problem of life and death for that organism? Right. So the first point that I'd like to make, and I have allergies. That's my first point. First point I'd like to make is that the brain is important if you want to consider what life is. The brain is legally and medically recognized as something important to decide whether you're alive or dead. And if you're brain dead, you are legally and medically recognized as dead. And that's in every state in the union. And if you want to read more about brain death, what this slide shows actually is a PET scan, and the bright colors that you see are representing glucose utilization. All right, and the brighter the color, the more sugar is being used. So it's metabolism, cell metabolism, and your brain is an enormous sucker up of sugar. It needs food. And that tells you something about the evolutionary importance of it, because we wouldn't have this tremendous sponge for this need for sugar and metabolism in this massive organ sitting on top of our necks if it wasn't critically important. And the one in the middle, obviously, is brain dead, right? I mean, there's nothing there. There's nothing going on. The one on the far right is like a very low resting state. This could be a coma or someone that's just totally out. So let's jump to consciousness. What is consciousness? And I looked for some good definitions, and what I found was there's a lot of them. Okay, and so I went to the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, and I came up with these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different kinds of definitions. Sentience, are you capable of sensing and responding to things in the world? Well, a Tesla can do that, right? And when it's driving down the road, we have some Tesla drivers here. If it doesn't sense and respond to the world properly, you have a serious problem. But it's not, we wouldn't consider the Tesla to be conscious, I don't think. I don't have one, so I don't know. Possibly. And then, wakefulness is important. You have to be awake. If you're sleeping, you're alive, but you can be totally out, asleep, not dreaming, and you're just, it's like you don't even exist. So self-consciousness is another kind of way of thinking about consciousness, that not only are we aware of our surroundings, we are aware of ourselves. And that is probably a key part of what we consider consciousness to be. And the next one is a little hard to grasp. It's this guy, Thomas Nagel. He's a philosopher. He's I think he has a medical degree as well. I'm not sure. But he wrote a book a while back called What Is It Like to Be a Bat? And this is a kind of a silly title, but it's one of the most referenced philosophy texts on consciousness that I was able to find. Everybody talks about it. And what he's trying to say is, if you can ask the question, what is it like to be that? Then that is probably conscious in some way, okay? And then conscious states, you can have varying ways of looking at that. Things like, awareness. You can communicate, you have a narrative, you can talk. You have transitive sensations, which means that you experience things changing. Life goes on. You can have intransitive sensations. You can have imaginary things happening in your head. And so there's many ways of defining conscious states, and I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty of that. And so philosophers like to talk about the hard problem of consciousness. And there's journals devoted to this. And this one, the cover story is about ChatGPT. And there was actually a guy at, I think Microsoft or at OpenAI, the company that developed ChatGPT, who at one point claimed he thought that this neural net was actually conscious, and they fired him. I don't know. I don't know if why or what's going on there, but it's generally not believed that these neural nets actually have something approaching consciousness. And so you can ask how or why this physical process of the brain can generate consciousness. And it may be very, very difficult to pin that down. The why questions are always really nebulous and very philosophical. How is really tough for this particular issue. Part of the reason is it's not physical. What can you measure? Where is the measurement that you can make with a scientific instrument, right? Where's the numbers? If it's not numbers, it's not science. If there's no number, you have a difficult time. So can you also consider that what we're asking when we want to probe the nature of consciousness is we ourselves are conscious, and we're asking what consciousness is. It's tautological. It's talking about it. It's self-referential. And so you can get into some big trouble, both philosophically, mathematically, and pretty much every other way when you start asking questions that are self-referential. Now, there's some history here. And this gentleman, the big picture gentleman, Rene Descartes, I know a good Descartes joke, but I'm not going to tell it right now. Laura's giving me a sour look. Anybody that wants to hear that, we'll go over it later. He had an idea. You know, you've all heard cognito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. Well, he had a pretty clear idea of what consciousness was. He knew the answer to this question. Consciousness is the soul. Okay, it's separate. It's this nebulous thing that's inspired by God in some way that is the seat of consciousness, and it's different than the physical body. And presumably they're two separate things, but they somehow are tied together, and that was all kind of nebulous. Well, the other guy, I mentioned Nagel before, he wants to probe this in a more scientific way, and there's a lot of ways you can do this, and none of them have been quite satisfactory. And Nagel had this quote, which I thought was really good. Is there a way of bringing mental phenomena into a unified conception of objective reality without relying on a narrow standard of objectivity, which excludes everything that makes the topic interesting? And so what he's kind of saying is the way that people are looking at this from a scientific perspective is so rigid that they're taking away. He wanted to have a more holistic kind of approach to solving this problem, and he wrote a book about it. And if you're interested, it's a fascinating book. I haven't read the whole thing, but I looked through it some. So let's get down to the nitty-gritty of what he was objecting to, which is the neuroscience, right? And we have to have a scientific, rational explanation for this. There are several parts of the brain. They're listed here. You can read the slide. The big blue squiggly part that caps over everything is the cerebral cortex. And this is where we know consciousness lies, because if you take that away, the person is a vegetable, basically. It is responsible for organizing sensory perceptions. It's responsible for thought and reasoning, voluntary movements, language. There's roughly 20 billion neurons of the 80 or 90 billion neurons in the brain. And that's only half the number of cells. You have another 80 or 90 billion cells called glial cells, which are sort of like the support framework, the scaffolding that the neurons are hanging out in. And the rest of it is mainly other parts. You can sort of look through. The cerebellum is responsible for, making your motion smooth so you can walk without falling down. If you had to think about it. Now, I played handball for years. I love the game, but what I learned early on is you've got to give way to the cerebellum, because if you think about what you're going to do, it's too late. The ball's already back there. It's behind you. Okay. So yeah, you gotta let things roll. And different parts of the brain have these different functions. Some of the important parts for our purposes of discussion are the thalamus and the corpus callosum, because that's the switching system that brings stuff in. That's like that purple thing there in the middle. That is feeding information to and from the cerebral cortex. So that's a really important part, and that'll show up here in subsequent slides. So how did this nebulous thing called consciousness evolve? And we have some pretty good ideas. A very, very simple organism is called a hydra. Now, a hydra has one of the simplest nervous systems known in biology for organisms that have that. It has a simple neural net. It doesn't have all that complex structure we were just looking at in the human brain. And it has little in the way of selective processing. It does three things. Those little fiber-like things coming out of the head part have stingers in it, and it will sting you, and then it will grasp you with those wiry things, and then it will eat you. And that's all it does. Stings, grasps, and eats. And that was about 700 million years ago in evolutionary time that kind of technology, if you will, was available. That was the latest thing. So, and then came things like eyes. And once you start getting that, well, you've got to be a little more selective in what you're going to do once you observe something. So you have to track objects. You have to have selective responses. You want to know, I don't care about what that is. That's just the waves moving things around. That's a fish that I want to eat. So those are, and arthropods are insects and crustaceans, and then came early vertebrates in what's called the Cambrian explosion. And that's when multicelled life started to develop all of these bizarre patterns, including things with vertebrae and vertebrates, which is what we are. And when that happened, there was a big advance in the brain structure. There's a thing called the tectum, which sits on top of the brain stem. Pardon me. And it's responsible for tracking motions and making decisions about which one I should follow and what I should pay attention to. And that was about 500 million years ago or so, was the Cambrian explosion. And then a few 100 million years later, we start having things like reptiles, dinosaurs, birds, and mammals. And we all sort of have the same kind of stuff in the brain as this was developing. In reptiles, it's called the volst. In humans, it's called the cortex, cerebral cortex. And it basically allows you to have external models of objects and assess intents. And that is something that I think is really important and will show up in subsequent slides. Now, some of you may be aware, and I think we had a talk on this a long time ago, but I'm not sure, of a guy named Giulio. Yeah. Giulio Tononi. And he came up with this idea of phi. And phi is a measure, a mathematical measure of what he called integrated information theory. And this allows you to quantify consciousness, if you will, or quantify the ability to be aware of your surroundings, to be self-aware. And the way that it basically works, it takes a measure of all the information in a system. But what it says is it's not just the amount of information, because I could have a 1,000,000 megapixel camera, and I get a file that has 1,000,000 megapixels and there's multiple colors, and it's a huge file. There's a lot of information there, huge amount of information. And you can get cameras that are even way bigger, but the bits aren't talking to each other. Okay, so it's integrated. It has to be integrated. They have to talk to each other to make some kind of this thing called consciousness happen. And he said you can actually measure that, and it's based on entropy, essentially, like if you're familiar with Claude Shannon, Bell Labs information theory, he basically said this is information theory ported to consciousness. It's how you have to have this selective interactions of bits, not just uniform. If each bit talked to every bit left, right, forward, back, up and down equally, it doesn't do you any good. You've still got the same amount of information you really had before. But if this one talks to that one specifically, but not the others, then you have more information in the system. And so when you selectively put that all together, you can add that all up and come up with a phi value for what consciousness is. And this is a form of panpsychism, because it doesn't have to be a human. Anything could be conscious to some degree based on how these bits of information are talking to each other. And so, well, not everybody buys this. A lot of neuroscientists, neurophysiologists, physicists, all kinds of people have arguments with his, not so much his math, but with his conclusions he draws from it. And I think what a common consensus is that that kind of thing is what could be called proto-consciousness. It's necessary, but not sufficient for us to be self-aware and thinking, etc. So recently, a more, I think, interesting model has come about. It's called attention schema theory. And there's a couple papers here by this guy, Michael Graziano. It says UC Santa Barbara, but he's also been he was at Princeton for a long time prior to that. And he came up with this idea that there's more to it than just the phi kind of thing. And I'll show you what it actually means in this slide. So his hypothesis is that consciousness arises from an internal model of attention. All right, and I'll explain what I mean about that. And let's start, you can read it all real quick, but let's start with the general principles of AST. And principle number 1 says contextual information is stored in the brain. Principle number 2 says the brain builds simplified models, and these models can be flawed, right? I can think I really understand string theory, but my model I have in my head of what string theory is probably flawed, because I don't know what I'm talking about. But so if you accept these two things as the core principles, you can move on then to the schema or models of the physical world. And that makes perfect sense to all of us. I mean, we each, if I close my eyes, I can walk probably out that door without falling down because I have a model of the room in my head. It's important because if I am standing at the bottom of a hill and there's a boulder at the top of the hill and it starts rolling down, the model in my head says, I better get my butt moving or I'm going to be squished. Okay, so these are really important things, these physical models of the physical world that you have inside your head. You also have a physical model of you. There's a physical model my brain has of me. And you know, you've heard of people with phantom pains and stuff. You cut off an arm and the guy says, it's still there. I can feel it. You know, your brain has a model of yourself. Okay, now let's take that one more level. Let's say the next level is schema or models of attention. All right, what does that mean? Well, you've heard of ADD, right? People with scatterbrain, they can't focus. That's a problem. You can't function well. So if you really want to have coherent thought, you have to have some way to model what is important to look at, just like the physical model. You have to know, I'm looking at that boulder, it's going to come down. So, if there is this external model of attention that you have, you can also say it's a model of intention of others. I can look at somebody in the audience and say, I think I know what you're going to do next. You're going to sit there and listen to me rather than jump up and down and scream in tongues or something. So, because could happen, but, you know, I have a pretty good idea of what's going on inside your head. Now, just like we have a physical model of the real world and we have a physical model of ourselves, we can have a attention model or focus model of others. We probably have one of ourselves too. And that allows us to focus on what's important and ignore those other things that aren't so much. And then we have the final piece of the puzzle, which Graziano doesn't really talk about very much, is language. We can put it into words, and we can put it into words in our head. And that's something that no other animal can really do. And so when you put this attention model into words in your head, you can claim that that's consciousness. Okay, so that's what this is all about. And I'll give you an example. This is sort of the fun break in the middle of the story. This is focusing on a potential catastrophe. And these are two cats. That's Maddie is the gray one. Finney is the Siamesal. He's not a full Siamese. He kind of looks Siamesal. And they're sitting in front of the porch door in our back of our kitchen. And there's a cat door in the screen door, right? And Maddie wants to come in, but Maddie is not coming in. She wants to come in, but she's not coming in. And what she does is she takes her paw and she scratches on the cat door, which wiggles back and forth and makes a sound. Okay. This is a signal. Maddie also knows that Finn is behind her, and Maddie knows Finn's plan. Finn's plan is that Maddie, when she goes through the cat door and she's got her front part, the bitey part, through the door, the only thing that's left in the back is her behind, and Finn wants to bite that. Okay, so what happens though, it ends well. The human servant responds, opens the cat door, Maddie comes in, and Finn is disappointed. Okay, that's a true story. It happens probably multiple times a day at our house. And so this shows you the advantage of understanding others' thoughts and having this attention model and an internal attention model as well. I think cats are conscious. We have cats, and I'm pretty sure. All right, so how do we become conscious? Let's bring this home to what the original story was about abortion and stuff. And so this slide, which may be hard to read the fine print, shows you fetal development, starting with a fertilized egg in the first week. Pardon me. As you go through the subsequent weeks, you have this thing that looks like a little, I don't know, a lizard creature. And then it sort of gets bigger and bigger. And after about 40 weeks, you have a human being. Okay. Not a surefire thing, doesn't always work. Sometimes things go oddly wrong. In fact, at a reasonable frequency. But at different stages of development, you get the nervous system developing, the heart, arms, legs, eyes, teeth, genitals, ears, it's all there. And that's fetal development. Now, notice that the period of embryogenesis, which is where the embryo is forming, goes to about 8 weeks. After that, you're in what's called the fetal stage of pregnancy. And that goes from about week 12 to week 40. And I'm not going to dwell too much more on this slide, but I just wanted you to have an overall picture of what things look like and what's going on during this process. Because if you're going to talk about abortion, you really ought to have some understanding of this. And I know very few people that talk about abortion that have even the vaguest clue of what's going on here. All right. And of course, we think that the brain is important for consciousness. We've been through that. That was earlier in the talk. This is what happens to the brain. If you can't read the little tiny fine print, I'll point to 6 months, 9 months, young child, teenager, and adult. Okay. So those are just some of the landmarks there. That's basically all I wanted to say about that. Now, a key, I think, to understanding the development during fetal genesis, if you will, is when is the cortex starting to become functional, get hooked up, etc. And there's actually a key event that takes place at 24 weeks when neurons from the sensory organs start to penetrate that thalamus area I showed you where the switching system is, where the brainstem and all the nerves coming up. It's like a bundle of fiber optic cables. They're going into the cortex, and that's where the seat of all of your reason is. That doesn't happen at all until 24 weeks or so. There's just no connection. And the cortex, a protocortex, is there, but it's not hooked up to anything. So what kind of consciousness can you have if you have zero input, basically? And that's a question I think that is important to consider if you're going to consider what you might or might not want to do in terms of making rules about abortion. If it's before 24 weeks, I'm not sure what you've got. What you've got is tissue, in my opinion, and I'm giving you my opinion because it's my talk. And so at 24 weeks, these neurons, and you can see A, B, and C. B is after 24 weeks in that fetal development stage, and then C is around birth. Okay, so that's the physical apparatus that's creating sensory input. Now, the question is it being processed in any way? And we'll get to that. So what about consciousness in fetal development? If we assume consciousness is located in the cortex and before 24 weeks, that's roughly the end of the second trimester. Okay, it's pretty darn close. But the other thing you've got to consider is the state of the fetal brain. and the activity of the fetal brain. Now, you can poke a fetus and it will wiggle. But you can poke an unconscious person and they will sometimes wiggle, but they're still unconscious. And you can make a very, very good argument that the fetus throughout almost all of its existence during the pregnancy process is basically unconscious. And the reason you can say this is because it's in a very, very low oxygen state. There's very little oxygen available in the placenta to allow brain function, which, as we know, because you saw those pictures of all that sugar utilization and stuff, that ain't happening. The ATP, the energy, depends on oxygen. We metabolize based on oxygen, and oxygen is very low, relatively speaking, in that environment. There's also effective sedation by pregnenolone, adenosine. Adenosine is, you've heard of ATP, the energy currency of biology. Well, adenosine is after the triphosphates are chopped off. It's like the uncharged battery, if you will. And so that and prostaglandin hormones, you're basically sedating the fetus. And this is what happens while the fetus is essentially in the womb. There can be incidences where it appears to momentarily wake up, and that can be triggered medically in various ways. But then it almost immediately goes back into unconscious bliss, as best we can tell, as best these people can tell, from the scientific literature I read anyway. At birth, things change rather radically. At birth, all of a sudden, this organism is now exposed to a radically different environment. Oxygen is plentiful. It's cold. It's been nice and warm, you know, all that time, nice and warm. And, you know, this rude medical person smacks you on the tushy and you start crying, all right, which is a breathing process. Oxygen goes way up. Cholinergic, acetylcholine release. These are the neurotransmitters in your brain. There's a flash, and you can record this through PET scans. But it can very, I've never had a baby personally. Some of you may have, but what I've read and what I'm told is the baby, when it is first born, is like, holy cow, and then goes back to sleep. Okay. So you have minimal consciousness and then you have sleep. Now, let's get to technology. Okay. This is a picture I got off of a history website, and it was, so I don't think there's any particular, I gave the reference. It was history.com website. It shows that fetal viability, people say, is a criterion, that's the second time, a criterion for abortion. Okay. So if that's the case, what if technology advances? What if we get to the point where you can take a fertilized egg and you can take it out of a biological environment and put it into in vitro in a test tube, and you can grow it all the way into a human being? Do you think that's impossible? I think it's difficult. I think it's darn difficult. I don't think we can do it today, but tomorrow is another day. Okay. Now you've got to start thinking, is this a really good criterion for what you should or shouldn't say about how abortions should or shouldn't be done? Because it's a moving target. And, you know, back in that day, that stuff was brand new. Okay. That was in the, I don't know, 40s, 50s, you know, they're trying to save the preemie. Yeah, well, because they couldn't, the little tiny ones just didn't make it back then, right? So some ethical considerations, and I'm almost done. I'm on slide 18 of 20 for those keeping track. The definition of fetal personhood, that's what triggered this whole thing. When is a person there rather than an organism? Well, you have to consider, are you a person if you're pretty much always unconscious? Now, there's a potential for consciousness. There's a potential for you to be a person, but are you, and what is the actual state of affairs at any given time? If you're pretty much constantly in a sedated, unconscious state, are you really there? And you've never been in any other state in your entire existence. As we get to these technological advances where we can, you know, grow a fertilized egg into a human, what kind of a rule should be made about what is allowed or not allowed? And these are states that are making this, state actors that are making this based on some kind of law that they're passing, telling you what you can and can't do. So you've got conflicting rights. When should individuals be assigned a right of essentially life? Should it be at birth? Should it be when the neurons go into the, you know, the cortex? And this is without bringing religion at all into the picture. So to help the discussion possibly, I'll ask some related questions and then I'll turn the floor over to discussion, etc. We'll pass the baskets. Should life and death decisions be made related to brain capacity and function? And what degree of function is there? If you think about organisms that don't have a brain, bacteria, I'm a microbiologist. I do experiments in the lab and I have, you know, a 100 ml bottle that has 10 to the 9th cells per mil. That's 100 billion cells per mil. And I'll take that bottle after I'm done with my experiment, stick it in an autoclave, sterilize it, pour it down the drain. Okay, I just killed 100 billion living organisms, independently living organisms. Should I feel bad about that? Plants, like I said, you can go to Home Depot and buy herbicides. What about insects? Everybody sells bug spray. I bet you everybody in this room has got some kind of bug spray in their house. Bug spray kills bugs. Okay, they actually have brains, but they're not real complicated ones. They're little simple ones. So is life less important without consciousness? Is consciousness a criterion that we need to consider? And if so, if you don't have consciousness, if you've never been conscious, how important is it that you stay alive? And then what amount of brain function is necessary? Suppose you have a brain that's been damaged. At some point, we call you brain dead, right? But there's a sliding scale between brain dead and, you know, a chunk of my brain got, you know, shot through with a fishing spear. There's people that happened to, and they live, breathe, walk around. Obviously, they might not quite be themselves, but they are someone still. So there's some degree of brain function that defines personhood. What is it? Can brain function be modified, you know, by advances in neurobiology? Can we restore consciousness at some point to people who are in what would be considered a permanent coma, or may never come out of a coma? Can we genetically modify using CRISPR technology or something, a brain to fix it, to take the the stains of age out of it and make it alive again. And can artificial networks achieve this state at some point? Is it possible using an AST type model where a computer engineer uses that idea of modeling the attention of the neural net? And if that is indeed an important characteristic of consciousness, we could essentially engineer a conscious computer. So, I put a little, under insects, I put a little thing about the Digambara Jains, and these are folks in India who, monks, they don't wear clothes, they don't do anything but pray and beg, and when they walk through the woods, they scrape the insects out of their path. They try not to, and they try to eat, they won't eat root vegetables because there's a lot of bugs in the root vegetables and they don't want to eat those. But they'll eat leafy greens and other things because they have to eat. And those they feel are like the least insulting thing that they could do. And so that's all the slides. I put them up there for reference during questions and answers if you have questions and answers, and I will turn the program back over to our program chair. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Fred. Don't go anywhere. Just real quick, as Fred mentioned, we are an all-volunteer organization. We got no money from any other organizations. We have exciting baskets that he's passing out. If anybody wants to put anything in them, it would be awesome. And real quick for ground rules for Q&A, raise your hand, wait for the mic. I'll be running around with it. One question at a time. Let everybody get a chance to ask a question. And because we started